Good afternoon. I'm Michael Menzies for Connect Media, and I'm pleased to be joined by the 18th Premier of Alberta, Mr. Jason Kenney. Good to see you, Mr. Premier.
Great to be here.
Really appreciate you having the time for us this afternoon. I just made you aware that this is actually the first live video for a new outlet, Lakeland Connect, which is an expansion of our Lakeland Connect, and you're a little familiar with what we do because down at the Cold Lake Air Show in 2018, we spoke then, so I just wanted to make you aware that you're speaking to a lot of the Northeast region this afternoon.
Yeah, I think I did an interview with you guys in Bonnyville about 3 years ago as well.
Yeah, there you go. So hopefully you'll be coming back soon, but we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. First, I want to talk about the ongoing COVID-19 response and relaunch. You know, currently we're sitting at 53 cases in hospital and 6 in intensive care. Those numbers are remaining steady or declining as the days go on. 400 active cases currently. So how do you see the province's progress so far, and how does that affect the conversations that are ongoing currently about phase 2 and reopening mid to late June?
First of all, we should be very proud as Albertans, but with how Albertans have responded to the threat and challenge of this pandemic. The numbers right now are very encouraging. The latest stat over the past 24 hours, only 13 new cases on about 3,300 tests. So in the past couple of weeks, less than about 0.3% of tests have been positive, which is down substantially from where we were at the peak of things about a month back. And as you said, we only have about 55 people in hospital with COVID. Michael, as you know, the big challenge for us in every place around the world here was to bend down the curve so that when we hit the peak of infections, that it didn't overwhelm the healthcare system with people in hospitals, more particularly people on ventilators in intensive care. And we have successfully done so with flying colors. We look back at it now, it's clear we hit the peak about a month ago. It was mainly driven by the outbreaks in 2 large southern Alberta meatpacking plants. But overall, we have had the lowest per capita level of infections, hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and deaths related to COVID-19 of the large Canadian provinces, and far, far below most places around the Western world. And we have done that with a lighter regulatory touch. We've had less stringent public health restrictions than most places than any other province, and that most places in the Western world. The only exceptions would be a few Midwest states in the US and I understand Sweden. So we've managed to get, I think, very strong results to limit the spread, flatten the curve, protect our healthcare system, protect lives with minimal impairment to the Alberta economy. Not to say there hasn't been any impairment, but it's been a much lighter touch than elsewhere. And I'm just so proud. All of that is a reflection of the ethic of personal and social responsibility that I think Albertans have always exemplified.
Well, you mentioned it with personal responsibility, and that's something on the show here I've been talking about, is sort of charting the path forward and how to move on from this. I want to get to some comments you made in the legislature Wednesday that largely I happen to agree with, particularly this quote, "We cannot indefinitely work to impair the social and economic as well as mental health and physiological health of the broader population for potentially a year for an influenza that does not generally threaten life apart from the elderly and immunocompromised." So I agree with the gist of that. So what can we expect to hear about a longer-term plan for the next 6 months or a year regarding the seniors population and the most vulnerable population when it comes to this virus?
Well, Michael, first of all, you may recall I did a televised address to the province about 5-6 weeks ago, and I started to lay out a vision, a strategy for coping with COVID in the long term, knowing that there could be subsequent waves and outbreaks. And what I said then was that we have to learn from those places that have had the greatest success in limiting the spread, preserving life while maintaining without shutting down their economies. And I pointed in particular to Asian countries like Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. Now, they had the wisdom and advantage of shutting down their borders from COVID hotspots like Wuhan and Iran very early on. We didn't, and that's frankly something, a beef I have with the federal government. But I said, going forward, what we've got to focus on are things like stricter border screening. We have to focus on building a wall of defense around seniors who are by far the most vulnerable to the disease. We have to have a very high level of testing so we can trace, track, and contain outbreaks before they become widespread. And we need as well to maintain the general rules about hygiene and distancing. And really what we're building on now is that wall of defense around seniors and the vulnerable. We've rolled out a $170 million package to support nursing homes, long-term care, and other seniors facilities of that nature. And we're going to see if there's any holes there that need to be plugged. But I've got to tell you, Mike, one of my concerns is this. While we need to build that wall of defense around the seniors, particularly in dense housing arrangements like nursing homes, we also have to balance that with the need for quality of life. We can't just lock up seniors indefinitely and completely cut off from their families, their loved ones, social interaction, exercise, and just normal life. And that, for me, is the biggest challenge going forward, which is how do we protect seniors from a disease that can run right through nursing homes with a terrible effect like we've seen, while still allowing that balance, that compassionate access, that social life that everybody needs. And I think that's something that no jurisdiction has really settled on how to do that best yet.
All right, let's talk about stimulus money and potential projects that could be happening over the next year. Local leaders have talked about spending that the provincial government could have for municipalities on projects. Unlike other oil and gas related regions, I was speaking to the Reeve, the MD today, was talking about, this Lakeland area hasn't had the recovery that other areas around the province have had since 2014, that it's, just been a continued downturn that's gotten worse over time. The MLA for the Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul area, Dave Hansen, is sure to tell me almost every time that 37% of bitumen royalties come from this general area. So will there be investment and some stimulus money provided to this local area?
Well, yes, there will be across the province, but we also recognize that northeast central Alberta region around the Lakeland area, around Bonnyville, Cold Lake, at Lloydminster, and that whole area, heavy industrial, in many ways a diversified economy because you've always had strong agriculture, but you've also got the heavy oil, non-conventional, natural gas, and those industries have been hit really hard over the past 5 years, and now we've seen this total collapse in energy prices, which obviously is affecting your area more than most. The answer to your question is yes. We've already taken some extraordinary action. Trying to protect the livelihoods of both families and job creators. We've already, as a government, put out $12 billion, or maybe I think we're up to $13 billion in fiscal action. That's included everything from emergency isolation payments for individuals, paying half the workers' compensation board for premiums, for employers, deferring property taxes, deferring utility payments, extending by about $5 billion liquidity credit through the Alberta Treasury branches, which many businesses in your region have taken us up on. We've, of course, made an historic $1 billion equity investment in getting the Keystone XL pipeline built, which is critical to the long run of the energy industry in your sector. We need that market access. So post-COVID recession, we can bring investment back and exploration in your region. We've also surged an additional $1 billion into capital spending to create jobs through road maintenance, for example, and a lot of that work is going to be done out in the Lakeland region. And later this month, we will be unveiling the overview of our economic recovery plan, which will include significant additional investments to support diversification. Another thing we've done is to roll $1 billion out with the support of the Government of Canada for accelerated well reclamation and completion to help us to create thousands of good blue-collar oil field service jobs while also addressing an environmental liability. So that program will have, I think, a disproportionate impact in the Lakeland region, and much more to come.
So speaking to you mentioned about the Keystone XL pipeline, Democratic hopeful Joe Biden said he would cancel the presidential permit on that project. And then you also talked a little bit about diversification. So a two-parter here. Are you concerned about the potential of that cancellation if Biden were to be elected? And then further to that, what sort of plans further to the long term to sort of not move away from oil and gas, but to also extend and expand some other areas so that the Alberta economy isn't quite as reliant on oil and gas?
First of all, Keystone XL is absolutely critical because when we get past the pandemic and the coronavirus recession, there will be a return of global oil and energy demand. And eventually the huge inventories that have built up during this period, partly because of the Saudi-Russian surge in supply, that inventory will begin to diminish. The market will get back into balance. Most projections are that will happen about 12 to 18 months from now. So let me be clear, no sugarcoating this. We're in for a tough year ahead. But coming out of that, when the market is back in balance, a couple of interesting things. I expect that U.S. shale will have come off reduced output and production permanently by millions of barrels a day. The U.S. Gulf Coast refineries are going to continue to be hungry for heavy crude to process. The Americans, whoever the president is, will be more conscious than ever about the strategic importance of North American energy independence. They need that energy. We need to get it to them. And post-recession, if we want to bring job-creating capital investment back into our energy sector, including to do exploration in the Lakeland region, we need that pipeline. It will add about 820,000 barrels per day minimum of additional capacity. That project is critical for our future. Also, I was not prepared to risk the future of Alberta's largest industry on the federal ownership of the Trans Mountain pipeline. We need an Alberta-backed Plan B. That's TMX. We're going to work very hard with the with the Obama, excuse me, it's been a long
the Trump administration.
Yeah, with the Trump administration, but also with the Biden campaign, yes. And should he win, the Biden transition team, to remind them that we're creating facts on the ground, and we will defend our investment should it be the permit be repealed. Let me come to your second question. Diversification, of course, is critical. First of all, Alberta is a lot more diverse than it was 30 or 40 years ago, even though oil and gas has grown significantly. That's because other sectors grew even faster, like services and construction. And they grew because of so many people coming to this province. Our population doubled in the past 35 years. It doubled because of the Alberta advantage, because we had the most attractive tax rates, the entrepreneurial culture, the youngest, best educated population, high-paying jobs. Those are the fundamentals that we have to double down on. That will be at the heart of our economic recovery package, but we will also be focusing on particular sectors that carry a lot of potential for the future, including in East Central Alberta, like petrochemicals, upgrading value-added agriculture, expanding our ag export markets, innovation, tech sector, tourism, etc.
Let's talk about the NHL potentially coming to the provincial capital in Edmonton.
You guys out there are mainly Oilers fans, I'm taking it, eh?
Well, yeah, I would say that we've been long-suffering Oilers fans, and it was only fitting, as the Oilers were set to be in the playoffs, that the season sort of stopped. Hopefully they can return to play. Hopefully Edmonton can be a location for that, at least in my opinion. Why is it an attractive opportunity for the province? And then a second part here is that if the NHL returns to play, it would be in late July, August, late fall. Would that, I'm sure that there's a lot of youth sport groups in the province, rec sport groups, just organized sports that are looking for a way to return to play as well. Could that happen in conjunction with saying, well, Alberta's a place where some of the pros can play. Maybe they're also setting a path to getting some organized sports at the lower levels back to playing as well.
Yes, yes to both. The Oilers have put together a really strong bid to be a host city for the end of the 2020 NHL season and the accelerated playoffs for the Stanley Cup. And one of the reasons it's super strong is because Edmonton and Northern Alberta have performed so strongly on COVID. There's basically no new cases in this city where I am right now. And so we got, the threat is lower than in any other NHL city in North America. Second point, they can create around the new ice district a quarantine zone. Obviously, a lot of these players would be flying in from the US and around the world, and they can go into a zone because the Rogers Place is attached by pedways to 2 hotels and a lot of other facilities. So they could have, and they've got 2 ice surfaces that are both NHL compliant. So you could have hundreds of hotel rooms, gyms, 2 ice surfaces, and 1 block from Dyna Life, which is a huge private lab company that could, in principle, sell frequent COVID testing to the players and staff. So you've got almost like a purpose-built infrastructure. Thirdly, it would create hundreds of service industry jobs in Edmonton, getting people back to work in those hotels and attached restaurants and so forth. Fourthly, it would be a massive Alberta branding opportunity. Tens of millions of people across North America, around the world, would be watching this province through the NHL playoffs, building up our tourism brand for relaunch. And so I just see that as all upside. In terms of the other sports, you're bang on. Whenever I talk about this on Facebook, people say, oh, that's fine, Jason, but what about my kids? Can they play summer hockey or baseball, whatever? And I'm pleased to tell you that Dr. Hinshaw, our chief medical officer, I expect her to be giving us a recommendation at the meeting of tonight's emergency cabinet committee to move forward with reopening team sports for the summer season with certain public health guidelines, in terms of making sure that we limit the spread. So, and that comes back to a question I didn't answer earlier about phase 2. We'll be discussing that in a couple of hours at the Emergency Management Cabinet Committee. And I'm confident, based on the numbers, that we'll be able to proceed, actually probably moving some of the phase 3 activities up into phase 2 and possibly actually accelerating phase 2 as well. As long as Albertans continue to act responsibly, we can go faster in the relaunch.
So does that mean it's been somewhat truncated? Like we were looking previously, perhaps when we were talking about, in mid-May or early May, okay, this might be a 3 or 4 month process. Well, now it could be a little bit quicker where
Yes.
We're on a faster track.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. It's not for certain. I've always got to lay out this condition. If the numbers suddenly spike in the wrong direction and we end up with hundreds of people in hospital, we're going to have to obviously keep some stronger health measures in place. But right now, there's no indication of that happening. And historically, diseases like this go down in the summer. And so I'm confident we'll be able to move forward faster than we had initially planned.
One final question for you. I know you're up against it here for time. The previous premier in her 4 years, she did not visit the Lakeland once. This is a pretty strong conservative area. Dave Hansen, Garth Roswell down in the Lloydminster Vermilion area. Even ties back to the Reform Party back in the day. So when are you going to be back and showing the Lakeland some love, Mr. Premier? Come on.
Well, it's a good question. I was in Lloyd not too long ago. I forget what brought me out there, but I got to get out and spend more time for sure in all that area in St. Paul, Bonnyville, Cold Lake, and Vermilion. A great, hardworking people in that region. And let me just give a shout out to one of the sons of the Lakeland region who's grown up in a 5th generation Alberta ranch family near Bonnyville. And that's Brett Kissel. He is going to be hosting a fantastic drive-in concert at the Enoch First Nation west of Edmonton, I believe next week. And it's a fundraiser to support the food banks that need that help during the pandemic. And Brett is a great ambassador for the Lakeland region, the agricultural heritage, and the hardworking people of that region. So I do look forward to getting back out there when we can start doing public events again, hopefully later this summer.
Mr. Premier, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate your time as well.
That's the 18th Premier of Alberta, Mr. Jason Kenney. I'm Michael Menzies, live for Lakeland and Lloyd Connect. Now you've been connected.